Chromance here, another Topic of the Week video. And this week, I'm going to be talking about Fire Emblem Awakening. This week's topic was submitted by the Real Wise Wolf on the Discord, and his topic is, what are your thoughts on Fire Emblem Awakening? Its story, characters, gameplay, and the Fire Emblem fandom's opinion on it as a whole. Okay, so to start off with, I'm not like super ultra into all the different gameplay aspects of the Fire Emblem games. I mean, yeah, I played Fire Emblem games, but like, if you asked me, like, what are all the specific differences between each version and what, game introduced which aspects, for the most part, I'm just going to be like, not totally sure. I'm really more focused on the story. I like playing them, of course, but, like, my main focus is on the story. Now, obviously, the main gameplay of Fire Emblem has basically remained unchanged for the most part for the course of its entire history. You have the tactical grid-based gameplay. There have been little tweaks and changes over the years, but it's not really something I'm like super focused on. However, there is something in terms of the gameplay that ties into the comment made about the Fire Emblem fandom, and that is casual mode. So, historically in Fire Emblem games, one of the gimmicks of the series is whenever you have a unit that falls in battle, they die. They don't get knocked out. They don't go, oh, I'm hurt, I'm retreating. They're dead. And you can't use them for the rest of the game. Now, there are always some exceptions to this. Certain cases where a character is, like, really important, so they can't die, or, like, they're important to a certain point, so they might retreat. But for the most part, they fall in battle, they're DED dead. Now, as you can imagine, that can be very frustrating for a lot of people. I know I found it very frustrating when I was playing Radiant Dawn, and it made a lot of the game extremely stressful to play. Now, because this has been how things are in Fire Emblem, the Fire Emblem fans, the people who've been playing Fire Emblem for years, they're used to it. It's just what the games are, and that's fine. But Fire Emblem Awakening, which at the time wasn't, like, they didn't plan for it to be the success it was. It was what revitalized the Fire Emblem franchise, and it's the reason why we got all new games. It's the reason why Fire Emblem Heroes is a thing. It's the reason why we got stuff like Fates and Three Houses. But one of the things that it did that I think might be the single most important contribution to making it more popular is that they added a mode that allowed you to not lose units in battle. That when they would fall in battle, they would do the whole, oh, I'm hurt, I'm retreating. As you can imagine, a lot of people found this a lot easier to play. I know I certainly did, and I far more enjoy playing Fire Emblem Awakening than I did Radiant Dawn, specifically because of that. Now, if they added a casual mode to it, like if they say they either re-released or remade like the Path of Radiance or Radiant Dawn, the Tellius games, if they did that and then all they did was add a casual mode where you didn't lose units when they fell in battle, that would be a massive improvement. Now, obviously, there would be other stuff that people would want, either added or changed or tweaked and stuff. But that is really important. And this pissed off a lot of Fire Emblem fans because, it kind of falls into the whole, oh, that's the casual plebs playing my games. And it's like, well, the Fire Emblem fandom was never big enough to sustain the franchise as it was. It wasn't as big as Mario or Zelda or something like that. So bringing in new fans by not making the games as crushingly difficult, well, I'd say that was a good thing, and it revitalized the series. Now, here's the thing. The games still have a mode where you can play with, characters dying when they fall in battle. Like, the games didn't just get rid of that altogether. They just made these separate modes. Do you want casual or do you want hardcore? Do you want to play a game where when your units fall, they don't die? Or do you want to play where if they fall in battle, they're dead permanently? It fits both. I didn't really think that that's a big deal, and the Fire Emblem fandom at the time really overblew that issue, because it's not an issue at all. It's just an option. Like, it didn't go in there and make it super ultra hyper, super ultra easy mode. I mean, they do have, difficulties. But, it didn't get rid of all the harder modes. So they can still play it like a more traditional Fire Emblem. And that option, I think, is super important. That, to me, is one of the best choices that was ever made when developing the Fire Emblem games. And thank goodness for Awakening for that. Now, moving a little bit away from that gameplay aspect, let's talk about the story and the characters. The characters they're really good. There's so many. Every single Fire Emblem game has so many freaking characters. So I can't just sit and talk about every single Fire Emblem character because there are too many. There are way too many. So I can talk a little bit about some of the main ones or some ones you see throughout the game. I mean, you obviously have your main character, Robin, and one thing that Awakening basically standardized is the strategist character, where you have a main character, you choose between if they're male or female, and you have that character be sort of the strategist of the group, and they get in and fight in the battle. For Awakening, they established that was Robin, and then in Fates you have Corrin, and then in Three Houses you have Byleth. And even Fire Emblem Heroes did this with Kieran, or the Summoner. But with Robin, you have them act as specifically the tactician. And you have Chrom, who's like the main lord of the game, your blue-haired lord with a sword. And he's like the battlefield leader. Like, he's the guy going out and doing a bunch of the fighting. So when Chrom is like if you want to know just how popular these characters got, Robin, Chrom, and Lucina, one of the breakout characters of Awakening, all three of them made it into Smash Brothers. Robin and Lucina making it in for Smash 4, and then Chrom coming in for Ultimate. Just from one game, you have three characters. I mean, Marth and Roy, and even Byleth and Corrin later on. That's one character per game that they're from. Awakening was a big deal. It was really important, and a lot of these characters were really good. I mean, I can't even go into significant depth because there are dozens and dozens of different characters, and goodness gracious, with their supports. Some people may have complained that some of them don't have the greatest amount of depth. Not all of them are super ultra deep, but a lot of them have a lot of supports, because the supports, you can get two characters, and if they're fighting next to each other, they build up a bond level, and they have different ranks to this bond. And for each rank, you get a conversation with them. And some of these conversations range from really interesting and enlightening to the characters to just plain funny. And some of the romance, some of them, obviously, with just how many there are, and this goes for all the games, not all of them are going to be amazing. Some of them are good, some of them not so good, some of them are really good. But, this goes for any kind of relationship, especially the romances, because there's a lot of different romances you can get in Fire Emblem Awakening. And, so many different options. It's basically just take your pick of what you like if you compare so many different characters together. And a lot of them will have second-gen units that will come from that. Certain characters have children that, they're guaranteed to come from them, and then you pick a parent that they that they'll get with, and they'll have different supports for depending on who their other parent is. And you have, goodness gracious, there's so many different things put into it, and you get a lot of interesting characterization for a lot of these, from the different characters in the present time, and you have the future characters like with Lucina. And Lucina is an amazing character. I mean, she's so heavily based off Future Trunks, it's not even funny. And it's no wonder I got so instantly attached to her when Future Trunks is my favorite character in Dragon Ball Z. But she's a great character, and she comes back in time to stop the bad things that happened in her future timeline. And then she had another group of the kids, kids around her age, that go back in time. And once those their parents get married, and then they can have that kid there, that kid will appear in a paralogue that you can recruit. There's a lot of different content that you can get with this, and I really enjoyed the way they handled it. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about this gameplay real quick. where you have like the map, and you can, you go through and you do all the different story missions, and you can go back to them, and you can use these boxes. I don't remember exactly what they were called, but you can use them to sort of call the Risen, like the zombie enemies of the game, and you can just farm out areas, and you can go to the different areas, use this box on it, and then fight again and level up and just do this as much as you want, as long as you grind out. You can do whatever you want. It's really good, and I had a lot more fun doing that than I did when I was playing Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. But anyway, you have all these characters, and it's just really interesting when you see a lot of these characters, because there are some characters that seem like they're one-dimensional at first, but then as you sort of get their supports, you find out that there's a lot more to them than you thought there was. Virion's a good example of this. When you're first introduced to Virion, he seems like the suave Fabio ladies' man, the guy who will flirt with any woman. Alright, we've seen the Casanova kind of guy before. Yeah, he's the pretty boy with the long flowing hair, and he's the sexy archer dude. Like, alright, move along, Virion, we've seen your type before. But then you actually start to get some of his supports, and you find out that he's got some hidden depths, especially with his romance with Olivia, which is actually really freaking good. Because Olivia is a dancer, but she's also like really shy, which is funny because she's got this very, kind of, sexy dancer outfit, but then she's like, oh, I'm super shy. She's pretty adorable. But when you do her supports with Virion, you would think, oh, Virion's gonna charm her, and then when he finds out that she's like nervous, he wants to help her learn to dance, but she's too nervous to hold someone and dance. So he helps her by practicing from across the room so she's comfortable, and helping her without sort of encroaching on her barriers or her comfort zone. And I was like, wow, that was actually really sweet and gentlemanly. Because that was the time when I realized, oh wow, Virion, I kind of was expecting him to be a bit of a, not a sleazebag, but to be, kind of a womanizer. But no, he's actually really sweet and genuine. And he actually makes a lot of sense as Inigo's father, who Inigo is Olivia's son, and he's one of the future generations that comes back in time. It really makes a lot of sense because Inigo, he flirts. He's also nervous like his mom, but he compensates for this by being overly flirtatious, kind of like trying to emulate Virion. But then when you find out and he interacts with Virion, Virion doesn't just like him acting like that. I'm like, this is really interesting. And it's something that I like is that you have all these different characters who you may see a bit of their character in the story mode, but you get a lot more depth to them through a lot of their supports. And sometimes you do all these different supports with these characters, and you'll learn different things about them. Like with Long Q, he seems like the stoic, tough swordsman. Again, a character archetype we've seen a million times. But then you find out more about him. You find out he's got an issue dealing with women. Well, what's up with that? There's actually a whole story going on with his backstory about why he has these issues, and different characters he interacts with will reveal different aspects of his character, and I feel like that's super interesting. And I feel like a lot of people who write off, all the characters are just, they have no depth, they have no character, whatever. I feel like that's really selling the game's characters short, because Awakening is a lot of good characters, even outside of the main characters, even outside of major characters like Robin and Lucina and Crom and Lissa and Frederick. You have a lot of main characters in the Shepherds group. So it's just, and I honestly, I would even encourage people, go play Awakening, get a lot of these supports, or if you don't want to play it, you can look up pretty much all these supports that I've been managed to look up are actually on YouTube, and you can look up different characters, different supports. And you can see a lot of these different characters and their depth and a lot of the different things that go along with them. Like, I mean, hell, you have like Kellum's character who, he's a big hefty dude in a giant suit of armor. He's a tank. But there's a running gag in the game that no one notices him, even though he's like this huge, massive dude. And it kind of, you may think, oh, well, it's kind of disheartening that Kellum gets kind of joked on and clowned on constantly until you do his support with Shershay. And a lot of his other supports involve the joke of, oh, I didn't notice you there, Kellum. But with Shershay, it doesn't. And that actually, it's really interesting. It's like, wow, she's a character who's so nice. She doesn't do that joke on him. I mean, I could go on and on about all the different characters, but there are a lot of good characters, and there's so many different things that you learn about these characters, particularly when you're doing all the different supports. Like, you learn where Lucina, like the mask she wore when she was doing, when she was pretending to be Marth, you know, you find out where she got that mask. Oh, it was because Jerome, who also wears a mask. Like, oh, so then you learn, especially when you have all the second gen like kids who come from the future, when they're all talking to each other, you learn about different parts of their history and their past and what happened in the future, and especially when you learn about how they act around their parents, and some of them have worse relationships with their parents depending on stuff that happened in the future. Like, especially Severa with Cordelia, because Severa has, like, Cordelia was seen as, like, this perfect, wonderful, like, Pegasus Knight, and she's just flawless and wonderful about everything. And then Severa developed an inferiority complex to her own mother because of that, and because she never really got to have a deep relationship with her in the future, because everything went to hell. She never really, and her mother, like, a lot of them died in the future, so that's why they come back. So then she never really got to have any closure, and you have all this. It's really interesting. I don't want to like go in and spoil all these different characters, but what I've talked about here is only a fraction of what's actually in the game with all these characters. Trust me, it's these characters are really great, and it's worth getting into it just to learn about these characters. Now, moving into the story, this is where things have a few issues. Now, overall, I want to say I'm not bagging the story. Overall, it's pretty darn good, and I generally really like the story. I mean, the story of what happens in the future with Lucina coming back, her trying to save her father, a lot of the different things that come from that. There's a lot of interesting stuff that happens, and I would say there's only a few parts. Like, there's one part in particular, but I'll talk about a couple of parts that really annoyed me. You know, for the most part, this game is a really good story. You know, and I won't spoil everything, but major spoilers that will be coming up really soon. So, if you thought I was spoiling stuff with the characters, a lot of the stuff that I was talking about there is just stuff you learn about in supports. But this stuff is going to be kind of a big deal. So, when it comes to the issues I have with it, because you've got a lot of the main plots in the story. Robin shows up. He or she doesn't know really who they are. They wake up, and you know there's all this story about them. And you find out that Robin is actually a vessel for the evil dragon Grima, and you've got all this backstory with them being related to like the enemy side, yada yada yada. And you have to fight like a doppelganger of Robin who becomes the vessel for Grima, yada yada yada. There's a lot of different parts to this, and I don't want to go over every little aspect, but for the most part, it's pretty darn good. Except, there's one part in the game that annoys me more than anything else. It's when Chrom's eldest sister, who's acting as like the leader of their country, the Exalt is the title, she dies. Now, you may be thinking, is this really that big of a deal? Just her dying isn't in and of itself that big of a deal. but it's how it happens. So the way that they handle Emmeryn's death is extremely frustrating. So she's captured and you have the evil bad guy. I call him Gangrene because I loathe his character. He's like really obnoxious and not even in like a good way, not in a... It's definitely not in the, oh yeah, you'll love to hate him kind of character. I just don't like his character at all. But he's going to kill Emmeryn, and the game does this at several points in the story. It'll present you with a choice. Do you want to do, option A or option B? Now, for the most part, these are actually generally not that bad. Now, they never change the course of the story or anything. It's not like, oh, if you choose option A or option B, you split off. It's not like with Fire Emblem Fates, where if you choose Nor or Hoshido, it goes in a different direction. Or the only really, really good route, Revelations, where you team up and you actually fight the bad guys. But, these are all just in Awakening. They all just change some flavor to text. It's just a little different, but nothing too drastically different. It doesn't change the flow of the story. In some cases, this is actually done really well. Such as, later in the game, when Lucina meets with Robin and wants to kill Robin because she realized that Robin is the one who is going to kill Chrom. Because this is something that happened in the future timeline. Now, male Robin can marry Lucina, so by this point, that might be her husband, and she's really, really torn about that, because her whole point of going back in time was to, stop the person who was going to kill her father and to save everyone. But then she ended up falling in love with this person. Now, conversely, with female Robin, Chrom can marry female Robin, and she can be Lucina's mother, which can also make this extremely conflicting. And those different scenarios really add a lot to it. And when Lucina says that she's, like, this was her intent, you have two options. You can either say, no, wait, no, stop, don't do this, don't kill me. Or you can allow her. Say, do what you think is right, basically. Now, ultimately, she doesn't kill Robin, and the game will proceed, and it'll stop her before she does anything. But it's fine enough in that, it kind of puts you in a sort of an emotional situation, like, oh gosh, what do I choose? And it can end up being pretty heartwarming, but ultimately it doesn't make that much of a difference. It's not that big of a deal. Now, you have a option, you can get a couple of these, but the only one in the game that I think was genuinely really badly handled was when it came to Emmeryn. Now, when I say she died, there's no way to avoid that. But the game decides to give you an option. Do you want to, save Emmeryn and possibly lose out on, fighting the main bad guy? Or do you want to charge forward and continue and let Emmeryn to her fate, making the, what would be, in terms of the battle, the strategically sound choice at the expense of the Exalt? It doesn't matter what you choose, she dies anyway, because she hurls herself off of a cliff. Now, it's supposed to be like, she didn't just submit to them and this changes people's perspective, but it was handled in such a sloppy way, and the fact that they give you the choice that you can specifically say, I want to save Emmeryn, even if it means I'm losing out on getting our best opportunity to go after Gangrene, I want to save Emmeryn, and then she'll hurl herself off of a cliff anyways, and I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? I was livid when I played that part. I think I actually closed my 3DS and I was just like, what the hell was that? Because why would you give us the option to save Emmeryn if you're just not going to have that option mean anything? it wouldn't have been as infuriating. It would have been annoying because it feels like they still kind of poorly, like, contextualize her throwing herself off of a cliff. You know, and if you wanted to, like, there are ways you can do it, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it just felt like such a slap in the face that they would even bother to give you this choice to make it seem like something was going to matter. Only for them to be like, yeah, no, you may want to save her, but you can't. Then why give us the option? Just have the cutscene play where Chrom is trying to save her, and then she decides to YOLO herself, you know, off of this mortal coil. It was such a terrible decision, and in all honesty, Emmeryn's death was kind of completely pointless. I mean, if you wanted her to die in a meaningful way, you know, what they could have done is they could have had a situation, and a lot of this stuff came up from talking with Emmeryn, so I have to give her credit, you know, when talking about some of this. A situation where you could have had her die in a way that felt meaningful and felt like it would really sort of make waves in, particularly the enemy side, is if you had a guy who was like a soldier, an enemy soldier, who was ordered to kill Emmeryn, but he hesitated. He's like, well, I mean, I don't want to kill her, like, and then Gangrene was gonna kill him, and then Emmeryn steps in and takes the blow for him. A little cliche, and I still hate that trope, but her dying is a sacrifice for an enemy soldier who she had no reason to protect, and dying to save him would have felt like a much more meaningful way for her to die than just her going, YOLO! But, in all honesty, if you wanted to introduce a choice, it actually could have been interesting if you actually did have a little bit of a divergence here. And yeah, it would still come back together, you know, afterwards, but if, you know, you saved Emmeryn, that should be like, alright, so because of this, you're going to end up with a harder fight with Gangrene in the end, because you didn't you didn't do something that would have weakened him. And if you choose to ignore Emmeryn, she dies, and then you have a much easier fight. So you actually have a balancing act. Do you want to do what you feel is morally right, but at the cost of making things harder on yourself? Or do you want to make the strategically sound decision and sacrifice Emmeryn for an easier fight? That would have been a relatively minor change that could have actually made this choice mean something. And then you can still have Chrom become the Exalt by Emmeryn going into like a coma or something. And the funny thing is, of course, this is another time when the coma test that Angel and I had come up with comes in and rears its head again. Because it's, as I've described the coma test before, and if you haven't heard about it, the coma test is if you want to determine if a character basically needed to die or if the death was significant and meaningful, you change this death to going into a coma for a period of time. You either, whether it's a week, month, years, it doesn't particularly matter. Does this really affect the story? And if them being in a coma doesn't really affect the story and everything plays out basically exactly the same, and if they wake up a year later and effectively nothing has changed, that means the death is a bad decision. Because it doesn't affect the story at all. And at that point, why would you make the choice to kill them off? This is a good tool to use, not just for stories that have, you know, unnecessary deaths, but also if you're thinking about like writing a story and you're trying to figure out, does this character's death mean something? Would these characters act differently if they just went into a coma? You know, and if it completely drastically alters everything outside of maybe a small part, like if it for the most part doesn't change a lot, or if it doesn't change anything, there's no need for that character to die. And as such, that's what happens with Emmeryn. If Emmeryn goes into a coma for a couple of years, and then, you know, she just kind of wakes up later, and Chrom has taken up the role of the Exalt because he had to, he was next in line, and Emmeryn was out of commission. Yeah, kind of pointless. And what's even funnier is that apparently there was enough of an issue with her dying with people that they added a free paralogue where you find Emmeryn again. She has amnesia, but you can find her having survived. And guess what it changes? Absolutely nothing. If she had survived from the get-go but had amnesia and didn't know anything, or didn't have any of her memories, then Chrom would still have to become the Exalt, and he would still have to take charge, and everything plays out exactly the same. Now, an issue I have, and I talked about supports. Now, there is one critical error when they handled supports. There are certain characters who absolutely should have had supports with each other, but did not. Chrom and his little sister Lissa do not have supports with Emmeryn when you get her in. She can support with a couple of characters. She can support with Robin, but not her own siblings. And I feel like there was a bit of a passive aggressiveness to when they added her back in, especially when you get the endings. And some of these endings are fine, they make sense for the characters, but then some of these endings, it almost felt like whoever was writing it was just like really spiteful and angry. Like when you get Emmeryn's ending, it's like, oh, well, she just never recovered her memories and always had like her sort of weaker, amnesiac mind. I'm like, seriously? They didn't even have her recover her memories later after the fact? That just felt like someone was really angry that people didn't like her dying, and they were like, okay, she'll come back, but I'm going to make this as suffering as possible. I'm like, come on, guys. But, you see this with a few other characters that should support, but don't. There's a character, Sayri, and she shows up later in the story, and she has a character who's her brother. Now, then one of these sort of optional paralogs, you get like an alternate universe version of her brother, and you would think, oh, well, they'll be able to support with each other. No, they don't. Now, there's some more content for in the scrambles, which those are good fun. But there are several instances where these supports don't exist for characters that you would think it's natural. Like this would be, in terms of writing a list out of the different characters that they should be able to support with, that these would be right up at the top. You bring back Emmeryn as an amnesiac who doesn't remember who she is or anything about her past, and you would think, okay, number one character, Chrom. Second, Lissa. Like, those are your top two characters, and they don't support with her. It's insane. It's a really frustrating, absolutely frustrating part of the game. And to make matters worse is that it's not just about Emmeryn's death. Emmeryn has a guard named Phila, and she's one of her main knights. So Phila is introduced earlier in the game. She is a unique model, she's named, and she's a distinct character. She's not just guard number 32. And then when she shows up during that whole part where Emmeryn is captured and you think she's going to do something, she dies instantly. We didn't even get to have her as a unit. We never learned anything about her character. We met her once, and then she shows up again and then dies. I'm like, well, wouldn't this be the perfect opportunity to have her join with the main characters and become a playable unit? Like, what does her death even accomplish? Like, why even have her be a character? Why not have her just be knight number 32 if all she does is die?
And to make matters worse, when you actually look at the full context of the scene, which I had actually forgotten about until I was going back and looking at the footage after recording the video, that makes this even dumber. Because when Phila shows up, you have, the main character standing around, and she shows up as a surprise. Oh no, Gangrene didn't expect it. Oh no, what's going on? And then she goes up to Gangrene, confronts him, talks, and gives him enough time to summon reinforcements that instantly kill her and all of the rest of her guards. Why did she do any of that? Why did everyone stand around twiddling their thumbs while this happened? Probably because this is the outcome they wanted to happen, but there was no real way to make it seem reasonable, so it just happened regardless. And what's even more dumb about this is that they could have had Phila swoop in, grab Emmeryn, and fly off, just like what Sumia did with Chrom at the beginning of the game, where she saved him from getting killed. That actually could have been excellent foreshadowing to how they save Emmeryn, but they didn't do it. Probably because they had this whole scene planned out where Emmeryn dies, and they didn't want to change that. It's just really infuriating when they want to force something stupid like this, and there's no logical way to make this happen, and there are a bunch of ways to avoid this, and they just don't take it.
Like, you can't even say, oh, well, it's a meaningful thing. No, it doesn't, because we don't know her character. Like, we barely have any relationship to her. We barely even learned her name before she dies. That was definitely a problem with that writing. And that section of the game is just a mess of writing. It is kind of infuriating. It's not all bad, but that stuff there, especially with Emmeryn and Phila, insanely bad, super trashy amateurish writing. And it's weird when you see otherwise good writing and then all of a sudden the quality just tanks and then it just goes back up to being normal and you're like, what the hell happened there? Now, another issue in the story, and this actually goes back into the supports, and this is an infamous problem that a lot of people who have played the game know. Chrom has very limited romance options. Now, Chrom needs to get with a lady so that he can make Lucina. She's the only, future character who is absolutely critical to the plot. She must exist, or else the entire story doesn't work. So Chrom needs to get with a lady. So he's got a couple of options. And when I say a couple, I mean 4 or 5. And out of dozens of characters and plenty of female characters that are introduced, he has an extremely limited, range of characters that he can get with. Now, that in and of itself is not the problem. The problem comes is, once you finish the first part of the game and you reach the midway point, Chrom gets with one of those few women, regardless of what their supports were. This is the infuriating part, and this kind of ties into a little bit in the gameplay. So Chrom has a few love interests. You've got Robin, and she's the most popular, female Robin specifically. She's the most popular one. You've got Sully, his friend, who, they have, massive just friend energy, and it's not a very interesting relationship. He's got Olivia, who can... This is actually super frustrating. Because Olivia can get with Chrom immediately after they meet. Because she's introduced, alongside Virion, in the final chapter of the first part of the game. So she can show up, Chrom can meet with her, and then go, let's get married. What? Some of the other marriages can be a little fast, but that's absurd. They don't even talk before they get married. It's absolutely asinine. And the other main option is Sumia, who is they kind of try to imply that she might be the canon, as much as you want to put stock in that love interest. But it's really, really bad. That might be the worst love interest. Because she's got a crush on Chrom, but then so does Cordelia. We'll talk about Cordelia with that in a minute. And just... she's kind of pathetic around him. And it's kind of like, Orihime with Ichigo and that kind of a thing, where her character is the weakest when she's just sitting there sort of simping for Chrom. And it's and when you watch some of her like her supports with him, it's like her trying to impress him. And it's like she has to like prove herself. It's not good. She actually has a far more wonderful romance with Frederick, one of the other knights and the shepherds, where he's the one who actually does stuff for her, and she doesn't actually have to prove anything, and like they have a very nice, very balanced relationship. Check out the Frederick and Sumiya support. It's actually really good. And the worst part about this is that if Chrom has so much of an inkling with a bond of any girl, he'll marry them. That happened to me in my first playthrough, where he had like a C support with Sully, just because they had been fighting next to each other, and I got that. And then when I got to the end of Chapter 11, I think it was Chapter 11. Yeah, it was the end of the first part of the game. He then suddenly marries Sully, and I was sitting there, and I was like at A rank with her and Vike, and her and Vike have a really funny support. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, wait. Whoa, hold the phone. Wait, what? Because the game doesn't really give you any options. It doesn't even allow you to choose. It just will automatically sort it out for yourself. So you need to figure this out way before you get to Chapter 11. And you need to, like, have everyone else married off. And at the very end, keep him as far away from Olivia as possible, so that the game doesn't just force him into another romance with one of these other characters. And it's so bad. And if the best option for this, if you don't have female Robin, is if you don't have him have any connection to anyone else at all, he marries some random village maiden. She doesn't even have a name. She doesn't have a character. She's just there. And what's baffling about this is that there are plenty other female characters introduced in the first part of the game that could have been another romance option for Chrom. What about Muriel? What about Anna? And you can meet Anna and recruit her during the first part of the game when you do the Anna paralogs. What about her? What about Cordelia? Like, Cordelia has a crush on Chrom. Like, and weirdly enough, she kind of has more of a resemblance to Lucina, way more than Sumiya, and which leads a lot of people to think that maybe Cordelia was originally intended to be like the canonical mom, and then they scrapped it and then did the far worse option of Sumiya. But then again, I honestly still think that Cordelia has a way better relationship with Stahl. Check out the Cordelia and Stahl support. But you have all these other, female characters who you can introduce in the first part of the game that could have been options for Chrom to get with. And I'm like, this is like one of your main characters. He's like one of the most important characters in the story. And him getting married and having a kid is ultra important to the plot. And you give, like, no options with this? What is up with that? Like, again, it's just weird writing. It's not even like it changes much of anything. You just, like I would have sacrificed a few other supports if it meant giving Chrom more of these supports. Because it really would have been really helpful for that. And also, not just forcing it in at the last minute. Come on, there are better ways to do this. At least do like what other games are doing. Like, oh, you want to choose X girl. And like, please. Please. Now, those are the biggest issues. And overall, they don't completely destroy the game. There's a little bit of an issue at the end of the game. And this is something I admit is purely subjective. I'm not going to say that this is super ultra objective. But at the end of the game, I was led to believe that I would be fighting Grima the Dragon. So I had leveled everyone up to level 20. I was master sealing everyone, class changing, upgrading constantly, min-maxing everyone's stats. I got literally every single one of my units up to level 20 and had them maxed out stats. I did all sorts of work to get them as prepared as possible. I poured in lots of money to buy new weapons that were specifically made to fight dragons, the Worm Slayer weapons. And I did the custom forging, which is really fun. I really like that mechanic. They have all, I was specifically boosting, damage and crit rate for all of them, and making sure that they would be absolutely destructive to a dragon. And then you get to the end of the game, you'll fight through some waves of enemies, and then you don't fight the dragon. You fight the vessel, the Robin vessel, the evil other Robin. And I one-shot him, because I was so maxed out on levels. Oh, that was our final boss. Now granted, I also had played Radiant Dawn, which has an absolutely absurdly hard final boss, so I was kind of expecting something of that level, and then I got to the end and I one-shot him, like, oh, well, that was easy. I personally feel like we should have fought the dragon, and then, once you, finish that first phase, then you get on top of the dragon, then you do the fighting the waves, and then you fight the vessel to finish him off. I would have far much preferred that. But again, I'm not saying that that's a massive problem with the game. That was actually purely what I was expecting, and I had kind of tainted expectations from Radiant Dawn of how hard the final boss is going to be. I mean, it could have definitely been harder, but ultimately, that's not really that big of an issue. So, ultimately, Fire Emblem Awakening is a good game, and it's easy to see why it got so popular, and it resonated so well with audiences. Especially a lot of people who were new to Fire Emblem and hadn't played the other games. Having the casual mode is super helpful for that, because it really allowed a lot of people to get into the game when there was that barrier of, well, if any unit dies or falls in battle, they die immediately and there's no way to stop that unless you, restart the battle. And it's just a lot of people just didn't want to get into that, and it's kind of emotionally draining to play that constantly. And some people are really into that, and that's fine. There's always that option to be hardcore. But having that option for this type of game was definitely a good idea. It introduced a lot of great characters, revitalized the franchise. Even if it wasn't perfect, even if it had a few issues, I would still say that Fire Emblem Awakening was a pretty darn good game. I think the Fire Emblem Fandom just went a little too hard on it just because it had an option to make things not soul-crushingly hard. But anyway, that's about it for today. If you want to submit a topic to me, you can either comment below if you're on YouTube, or if you're on Tumblr, send me an ask, put topic : whatever topic you want me to talk about. Or if you're on the Discord, you can go to the topic submissions channel and submit a topic there. Just make sure to follow the rules that I'll be posting down below. If you want to watch last week's topic video, you can check that out here. If you want to watch next week's topic video, you can check that out here when you get that done. So what are your thoughts on Fire Emblem Awakening? Please comment below, and thank you for watching.